Welcome to the latest installment of Brand Brothers. I'm Doug.
And I'm Johnny. Today we're talking about typography in branding.
All right, let's get to it.
Typography.
Typography.
I call that fonts. What's the difference? Anything?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference. So typography is really the study of and the creation of, whereas fonts are kind of the result of.
Okay.
So fonts are what you think of when you think of Helvetica,
Sure.
or you think of Times New Roman. And you shouldn't be thinking of Times New Roman, but in case you do, you're thinking of that as a font. We generally refer to it as a typeface. The difference is virtually nil.
Okay.
A font is a specific weight, whereas a typeface is a family. So Helvetica Bold is a font. Helvetica Narrow is a font, but they're all part of the Helvetica typeface family.
Okay.
And so typography is the creation of said fonts. And so these fonts were created for numerous reasons.
So these go back, I assume, to printing press days, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And before, right?
Oh, I guess they did have handwritten fonts.
They etched them, right?
Okay.
Which is where you find Roman, right? That whole Roman concept is from the engravings and etchings of Roman type.
Okay. Times New Roman is evolution of...
It certainly was one of those things. And then you also have other typefaces like Trajan, which come from that kind of era. They are derivative.
Okay. So
and every modern font today is derivative.
Okay. And my understanding is that there are basically two kind of families, like master families. Like you got the serif and the sans serif.
It goes a little bit more vast than that.
Okay.
So you also have your decorative fonts, you have your handwritten fonts, you have numerous categories of fonts.
But, so it's beyond just serif and sans serif.
Correct.
Okay.
And so it also gets a little bit convoluted as you dive into this, right? So a serif are the little embellishments that you find at the end of a letter. For example, when you look at the letter L, when it's a lowercase l, that's sans serif, it is simply a vertical bar.
Looks
right?
like a one.
Or a capital I,
right,
without the little sticks, right?
Sure.
And the little sticks don't necessarily mean that those are serifs. Serifs, how can I explain it more simply? So when you have those little sticks that stick out from that vertical bar, then those are your serifs. Serifs can be slab, which is when they are vertical and horizontal lines like the shape of the letter itself, or if they're tapered, and that's what you would generally identify as a typical serif.
So you'll see those like the Times New Roman that has like sort of the almost like wedges at the edges.
Sure, wedges at the edges. Absolutely. That's what serifs are. Wedges at the edges. I like it. But I don't like us continuing to talk about Times New Roman. Can you pick a different one? Like papyrus. Everyone loves papyrus.
I love the there was an SNL sketch with I think I can't think of the guy's name, but where they talk about papyrus as like the font for Avatar. Right?
Yes. So, and the funny thing is that not too long ago, there was a second SNL sketch when Avatar 2 came out. And the nightmare was that they continued to use papyrus, but it went from papyrus regular to papyrus bold. And so the whole sketch is about this nightmare of using papyrus. And the actual typographer, the guy who created the papyrus font, he was interviewed about this. And of course, he didn't know that it was being used until we knew that papyrus was being used. And of course, it was not created to be a title font for a feature-length motion picture.
Okay, one last question before we move on to the implementation of these things. You mentioned a typographer. That's somebody who makes fonts for fun and profit?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the long and short of it is yes. A typographer, it not necessarily everyone who creates a font can be classified as a typographer. It is definitely a skilled trade. But there are people who do it as hobby, who do it for fun. And but there are foundries, type foundries, that create fonts or commission fonts to be made.
Okay. Because I've seen those like websites where it's like you can get free fonts, and are those like all open source, or
So
they're like
yeah.
seem like some of them are copies of maybe copyrighted fonts, and
Yeah, they're definitely, like I had said, all fonts are derivative in one way or another. So you do have licensed fonts,
right.
and you have open source fonts. So licensed fonts you might be paying for from Adobe or typography.com, which I believe is Jonathan Heffler's company. They're the ones who created fonts like Gotham. And so Gotham is derivative of Helvetica, but Helvetica is derivative of Newhouse Grotesque, and it keeps going back further and further. And so when we're talking about licensed fonts versus open source fonts, then you have open source fonts like what you can find on Google Fonts, for example, where you can download those fonts for free. There are no licensing restrictions, whereas a licensed font is either licensed by the desk or the computer that it's on, or it's by the company for usage, or it's by actual application. So there are some licenses that are incredibly narrow in scope, but open source is the complete opposite. You're free to use it as you please, no questions asked. And so you can get some amazing, beautiful typefaces out there. For example, I just mentioned Gotham, that was done by
Batman.
by Heffler and Frere Jones.
Okay.
So that duo created Gotham, and then there was a subsequent font that's rather derivative. It's pretty uncanny how similar they are, called Montserrat. And so it has a very similar appearance, similar aesthetic, except the difference here is that it's open source and free to use for anyone.
So when you're talking with a client and you're looking at their brand, how do you choose, say, this is a good font for you? How do you get to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the very beginning of the process, of course, begins with putting together the messaging brandscape. That messaging brandscape helps us to identify a litany of points. I believe we had a show about it previously, so I'm not going to dive too far into it. But one of the key components that comes out of a messaging brandscape is tone. Different people like to have different numbers of tonal words that help to identify what the emotional connection is from a brand to its audiences. So those words might be accessible. Those words might be luxurious. So when you have those two components, so you're not going to have luxurious and accessible in the same brand.
That would be a really interesting brand, yeah.
Well, I mean, we have plenty of contradictory things, right?
Sure.
Military intelligence. How does that work? So anyhow, terrible old joke, but I'm here for it.
Jumbo shrimp.
Exactly, right? So when it comes to accessibility, it makes sense that you would also use an open source font, right? And then when it comes to luxury, it would make sense that you use a licensed font. However, what we're seeing current trend, when I say current trend, I mean the last 2, 3, 4 years in design, is what many designers refer to as blanding as opposed to branding. And so we're seeing a lot of companies that are higher end companies, right, moving away from their decorative typefaces or their custom serif fonts into more of a sans serif direction, and a lot of them actually toward Helvetica.
I guess the most recent of those that was a bit controversial was Cracker Barrel.
Oh my gosh! Well, I guess that one just came and went, didn't it?
Well,
I mean,
we hardly knew you knew Cracker Barrel.
and that's
font.
and that's what happens when you just design by feeling and don't leverage data, right? They could have resolved this entire debacle by having engaged their audience, right? It would not have been complicated for them to have sourced a number of customers to get their feedback
Right.
before they experience such backlash. But again, back to typography and branding, I don't think that what they presented
needed to touch on that blanding episode that just happened.
But but see, I don't think that it was a mistake where they went with it. It almost felt like they refined the typeface that they had, as opposed to threw away all of the heritage that they had. The complication is that they got rid of the character, right? They got rid of that mascot and they got rid of that bean shape or whatever it is that they put their logo in. There were so many opportunities to have been leveraged to have turned it into something amazing. The problem is that it was so oversimplified in presentation and that they neglected to educate their audiences. But I don't think that it was a lesson in what not to do for visual representation. I think it's a what not to do from a public perception point of view, because anytime we reposition a brand, we want to educate our audiences that this is coming, and we want them to understand why it's coming. So
how do you do that?
So there are many launch components I think that we might want to save for another episode.
Sure.
But just to briefly touch on it, it comes in a multiple set of ways, right? So first is maybe you have an email campaign that you send out to your existing customers. You also put something, a little teaser on your website. So maybe there's a banner that says new look coming soon, get a sneak preview, and you can build up to that. And then of course, there's media relations to help roll that out depending upon the size of the company. And there's direct marketing that you can do as well.
Yeah, it did seem like that particular one with the Cracker Barrel brand, it seemed to hit everybody from out of the blue. Like it seemed like people weren't expecting that.
And I think the same thing kind of happened with Jaguar, except Jaguar told us it was coming.
Right.
The issue is that the way that it was embraced was terrible, right? It felt very out of touch.
Right.
And that's the importance when you're creating a brand, is that specifically typography, is that it needs to feel like it is corresponding to your audience expectations. So if you are selling a luxury product and you present it in a fashion that feels like, 1990s web design, where it's super busy and it is using like Courier, that typewriter font, that lacks sophistication and edge, your audience is going to be confused by it, right? There's a particular set of aesthetics that go with luxury, whereas when you're dealing with things that are a little bit more accessible, it can be a little bit more fun. It can be a little bit more loose. It can be a little bit more irreverent.
It makes me think of like the early Twitter logos and like their distinctive sort of fat rounded fonts that looks that felt. It almost drove an entire design change across the internet.
Yeah, it had that. It also had that three-dimensional aspect to it, right? It looked like it could have been rendered in some sort of 3D program. And it was kind of a bubble font. It was a sans serif font with rounded edges, kind of like Helvetica round. And it had stroke on it. It was a heavier weight. It felt fun. It felt accessible. It didn't feel threatening, right? It felt available, and it felt like what you wanted social media to feel like.
Right. So I know that there are some sort of almost comical meme fonts. I mean, I say comical like
papyrus.
or Comic Sans,
Yeah.
who people joke about, like it's sort of almost a newbie mistake, making a
Right.
flyer and only using Comic Sans, or typing a professional email and choosing that font, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's because fonts convey tone, right? Whether you're looking at a typeface and understanding what tone it conveys or not, there's value. And even when it comes to Comic Sans, and this is a hot take, Comic Sans sucks, generally speaking, but it has a time and a place, right? So when it comes to education, for example, it is a fantastic typeface, not because of its aesthetic, although it does feel very accessible. It doesn't feel like it's super authoritative. So for younger children and dyslexics, right, there is scientific data that backs the usage of Comic Sans for people that have difficulties reading, specifically with dyslexia.
Interesting. So,
but it still sucks, and I would never use it.
But I guess what you're saying is that there's a time and a place for different, that even
papyrus,
even
curls has a time and a place. Again, would I choose curls? Probably not. I think there are more sophisticated versions of it, but can it be kind of fun to use as an initial letter on a child's backpack?
Right.
Sure, that could be fun, right?
The I guess in this discussion, capitalization matters too, because if I was just thinking about typing a professional email in choosing a Comic Sans font, also typing one that's in all caps, or a message that's in all caps,
right,
gets received a certain way versus something that is capitalized correctly, or even something that is just lowercase and that uses no punctuation.
Yeah, like Twitter, for example, was all lowercase originally. And then you have other brands like Brand of Brothers that is in all caps. Yeah. And then there's the playing with weights. So you have typefaces and you want to make sure that they are complementary and that they're applied correctly and uniformly, right? So when it comes to typefaces, you want to have contrast and you also want to have complement. So there are serif typefaces that have complementing sans serif typefaces and vice versa. And there are even decorative typefaces like script or handwritten typefaces that can work in harmony with the sans serif and the serif typefaces. And when tone calls for it, you might want all three. However, you might also have distinguishing characteristics like maybe our brand fonts also encompass different weights. And so not only do we have our open source fonts, we also have variable weight fonts. And so variable weight fonts are just absolutely incredible in terms of diversity and what they can present. They're not completely ubiquitous when it comes to desktop publishing using things like Microsoft Word. However, when you're using Adobe InDesign, for example, you can adjust the variable weights, whether it's bold, semi-bold, or even in between.
So, I get you. So you can actually, instead of having like 5 different options where you've got narrow, semi-narrow, regular, bold, semi-bold, bold.
Something to that effect. Yeah. So basically,
that's what I see anyway.
So just a really quick correction. So you'll have narrow, you'll have regular, and you'll have extended. And then you'll have the weights. So your weights are going to be light, thin, regular, medium, bold, semi-bold, heavy, black, right? Those are your varying weights. And what's really cool is that you can granularly shift from between one of those in toward another without going all the way toward them. So if a weight is too heavy or too light, you can just make a slight adjustment and get it so it's perfect. It's the Goldilocks of fonts.
Something I do a lot of memeing. I make my own little memes, specifically Seinfeld memes. So, but one thing that I use this little tool that is like just basically a little graphic edit or a little image editor specifically for memes. And
Canva?
It's called Memento. And
is it free?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Great.
I think so. I think there's a paid version and a free version. I don't remember.
And are we sponsored by either of Canva or Memento?
No, but we'd like to be. Anyway, one of the things that I have difficulty with is readability of my caption, right? Underneath, and usually it's over top, especially if it's dialogue. And so I play with things like shadow and stroke and these, but I
as a designer, I am hurting a little bit inside, but I'm listening.
So, but all with the goal of making it more readable. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the typography choice and legibility and that and
Sure.
how that works.
So when it comes to legibility, there's no question that it's easier to read something that is bold and large and lacks decoration, right? When it is a utility font, like Helvetica, for example, Helvetica Bold is going to generally be incredibly legible, even when it has a reduced tracking. And for those listening who are unfamiliar, tracking is the spacing between all of the letters and words, whereas you have kerning, which is your individual spacing between letters. So back to legibility. So when it comes to legibility, you have to have contrast. That's really what it comes down to. So can you have a thin sans serif typeface be legible? Absolutely. So long as there's sufficient contrast and margin, right? Giving enough breathing space for those words to be read is imperative. So ideally what you have is a weight that is both beefy enough to be read, but also thin enough that it matches your aesthetic, right? Unless your aesthetic is big and bold, you don't want to be showing Gotham black, for example, when your typeface is really supposed to be Gotham thin. So how do you fix that? You can resolve it a number of ways. You can make it so it's not overlaying an image. You can make it so there is a color overlaying the image, and then you have a complementary color on top. And to be specific about this complementary color, you have to be super careful because complementary colors also create vibration. So I'm talking about white on black, for example. That's not going to create as much color vibration as you'd get if you put yellow on purple. So don't put yellow on purple, put white on purple. Or make the purple darker, make the yellow the same, make the yellow lighter, right? You can use varying effects.
What if you're celebrating Mardi Gras and you really want yellow on purple?
So, and you know what? That's an opportunity to use a stroke or to use an outer glow, but do it sparingly, make it make sense. Don't do it as a hack. Do it where it is intentional and that it's thoughtful.
So, wrapping up,
oh no, I'm having so much fun.
I know we could literally talk for hours about fonts.
We could. I mean, we can start with the A's, right? And I know your favorite font is Arial, right?
Of course. Arial bold. Arial narrow.
Are you sure wait, you mentioned memes. Are you sure it's not Impact that's your favorite?
Impact seems to be the default in the memeing world, for better or worse.
Worse.
And it's usually all caps.
So, and again, it has to do with legibility. If you look at those memes, it's Impact, which is this bold, narrow font, and which the purpose is twofold. One is legibility, and two is being able to cram as many words into that space as possible.
Right.
But then you'll notice that usually these memes have white fonts, right?
Yep.
So it's impact in white,
Yeah.
and it has a black outline. And those two together, while really discordant, definitely makes it legible.
Right.
So,
Because you're going for like boom, impact, understood. Yeah.
but is there a happy medium that doesn't use a craptastic font like impact? 100%. So really what it comes down to, just a quick recap. So when choosing a font, as it relates to a brand, it should be reflective of tone, right? And it should also be, it should have complementarity, right? It should basically speak to color schemes and imagery and make sure that everything is complementing each other. And then we've been talking about legibility, right? That comes down to different weights, different sizes, making sure that people can see what you're putting.
Contrast.
Yeah. is another component. Proper spacing, line height, right? All of these feed into
Capitalization.
And title case and lowercase. All of that feeds into how you convey your brand through typography.
Has there been any, like looking back, Remix has been around for almost 20 years now, and you've been doing this longer than Remix has been around.
Just a little, yeah.
And any time in your past where, good or bad, where a choice was made and it proved to be particularly surprisingly good or surprisingly bad?
Wow. I would say that generally speaking, we've had expected results. The times where it was unexpected were actually in the design process, where we put things in front of focus groups and we would put out a throwaway design.
Oh, and they liked that
and
one.
That was the one that won. And
what do you do in that case?
You do your case study again to make sure the data is consistent.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, the only time where we've selected a font where we've been surprised is when we've saw the data and we're like, we don't like the data.
Well, I like the data that says this is the end of our show. So thanks for joining us today.
Nice segue. Thank you for tuning in to Brand of Brothers. Big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Remix, the branding agency, along with production assistance from Johnny Diggz, Simon Jacobson, and me, Doug Berger. We can't forget music by PRO. Speaking of not forgetting, remember to do that like and subscribe thing, and find us at brandshowlive.com and follow us on the socials at Brand Show Live.